Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as we do every Thursday, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts. My guest today is an internationally respected designer, photographer, educator, and martial arts master. He studied Eastern philosophy, healing arts, and combatives for more than 45 years. He's the author of over a dozen books, including the over 1,100-page Hapkido, the almost 900-page Taekwondo, and a unique series of general martial arts books that provide an in-depth look at the core concepts and techniques shared by a broad range of martial arts. Please welcome to the show today, Mr. Marc Tedeschi. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. I'm really happy to be here.
Good. How we like to start it off with all my guests, I want to go back to the beginning and find out what was that first spark? What led to that first interest in the martial arts for you?
Boy, that's going back a long way. You know, it's hard to put a finger on, but as long as I can remember, I think perhaps I was born with an innate attraction to combative arts that got fed along the way by, when I was young, by popular culture. My grandfather taught me to box when I was in grade school. And I used to love watching. In those days, boxing was on television. Mm-hmm. I used to like to watch that. I used to love watching Muhammad Ali, and I would always much admired his styles and movement, the way he fought, and would try to emulate that. In high school, during the winter, we all, we learned to wrestle. We had to wrestle in gym class.
Oh, okay.
Somewhere along the line, I think my parents bought me a karate book. And other than that, the other thing I think that was probably sparked me was back in the very early 70s, there was a show on television called Kung Fu, which was about this, was about a Shaolin monk who basically I forget why he ends up in America, but he wanders throughout the West of the 1800s from town to town. And each episode, he basically walks into some town where there's, he gets embroiled in some form of mayhem, in which he, handles himself or, exhibits martial arts at some point.
Right.
And, but he does it in a way that's, he's very calm and dispassionate. And I think, growing up to someone like myself was none of those things, probably pretty combative and personality and not emotionally controlled. Something like that seemed, the idea that you could study this, something like a martial arts or life discipline and come out of that with some type of emotional control and calmness and whatever seemed like a very attractive thing to me at the time.
Okay.
But I didn't actually have the opportunity to study Eastern martial arts until I went away to college at RIT, Rochester, New York. And at the university, there was I don't remember if it was a gym class or club sport or whatever, but you could enroll in karate as a class. And the class happened to be, it was Ishinryu karate.
Ah, okay.
And the instructor was a young fellow who had just seemed young to me then. I'm not sure how young he was, but he had just recently returned from Okinawa, where he'd studied with the founder, who I think was Tatsu Shimbaku, can't remember, but his name was Joseph Jennings, and he was a great teacher. I think he later on went on to become one of the more prominent Ishinryu masters in the United States, and founded Panther Productions, which produced a lot of video content, martial arts stuff during the, I think, 80s and 90s.
Oh, yeah.
It might still be around, I'm not sure. But that's where it sort of got started. And he gave us all a little booklet that was sort of stuff that we were doing, like forms and techniques and things like that, just a bunch of paper stapled together. And back when I was in college, I had to work full time to put myself through school. but I had a job which was very fortunate. I was a night security guard, which meant, you do a round for maybe 5 minutes of every hour, then you'd have the rest of the time to yourself. And this was graveyard shift. So
nice.
Yeah. So I would use that to get a lot of my schoolwork done. Then I would also, practice the martial arts because you have many hours of nothing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I would set up stuff or work on forms, things like that. In the 1980s, my primary teacher, the most influential teachers I had who had started in the mid 80s would be Merrill Jung, the well-known Taekwondo and Hapkido master in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then later on also with Professor Wally J.
Oh, cool.
Small Circle Jujutsu, who's I would consider probably one of the major innovators in the 20th century.
Yeah.
And they had a tremendous influence on. I was with them for decades, and by that point, I was training 7 days a week with Master Jung, and then a couple days a week with Professor J in the 1990s.
Wow.
So yeah, the bug bit me, I guess. Huh?
Okay. Well, I want to back up a little first. Go to the college and the Ishinryu karate. First of all, how long did you study that style, and did you attain any rank in that?
No, I didn't. I think I studied maybe a year, so not really that long.
Okay.
And I didn't attain any rank. I couldn't afford to. My budget was back in those days, and it wasn't much. I think it cost like $20 or something like that, to take a test for various colored belts. But really, I didn't have money, and I wasn't that interested. And there were I think one or two other people in the class who had been there for years and were still wearing white belts.
Oh, wow.
And I remember because they just didn't care,
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, well, that's sort of interesting. Okay, I'm good with that. I don't have to have a belt, but I like doing it.
That's the important thing.
My exposure there was fairly brief compared to what happened later on.
Right. So was there anything else while you were in college, or nothing else till after college for martial arts?
Not till after college.
Okay. Okay.
I was involved in a lot of sports in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and I was involved in collegiate sports. And that was pretty demanding in terms of time. Most collegiate sports, you're doing, 2 sessions a day, and then you're trying to keep up with your academics at the same time. And
Right.
it's really difficult, if not impossible.
Okay. So what collegiate sport did you do? I was just curious.
Tennis.
Oh, awesome.
I played soccer and tennis in high school, and then just tennis in college.
Okay. I love tennis. That's when I was in school, we did not have a boys team, and that's probably the sport. We didn't have a boys tennis team or a boys volleyball team. Those are the 2 sports I probably would have played. I watched
Where'd you go to college?
College was at back then it was called Moorhead State University. Now it's Minnesota State University Moorhead in Moorhead, Minnesota.
That, yeah.
Yeah. That was actually where I had my first experience with Taekwondo, was actually at that college. So, all right. So then you ended up on the West Coast.
I moved to the West Coast.
Yeah.
It wasn't back. I grew up in New Jersey.
Okay. What led to that Taekwondo and Hapkido school? Was that, did you do a lot of research before that? Was it the first school you found?
No, I wasn't that smart. I just
just luck.
I'm not quite sure how it happened. I think there must have been some friends training there. I mean, someone gave me Master Jung's name
Okay.
to look at. I think it was someone I was working with at the time. But I had seen, when I was in college, I'd seen the film Billy Jack. It was
yes.
the choreography was all done by Bong Soo-han.
Mm-hmm.
And actually he acted a lot of, did most of the scenes. And that made a big impression on me. That really seemed, I remember thinking, oh, that seems like an art I would really like doing, because it was eclectic and involved so many things. And coming to California, you have opportunities to train in the martial arts that you just don't have
Right.
on the East Coast or, the Midwest.
Definitely.
It all really started out here. And, once I moved out here, I think, well, I want to, it was the opportunity to really delve in a serious way. So, and at that time, Master Jung was a Taekwondo and a Hapkido program. And, in Taekwondo, there was a lot of sport Taekwondo, and they had a lot of national champions and things like that. Later on, people that, went to the Olympic Training Center and so forth. So I think I remember the first time I saw him just moving on the mat. I just went to take a class. Just oh, this guy's the real deal, and this is where I want to train.
Okay.
And it was probably a simple decision as that. And then it's like, the more I trained, the more I loved it. I would go in there when the school opened at 3:30, 4 o'clock every day, and train till it would close around 9:30, something like that, 10 o'clock. And the first part of that would be several hours of Taekwondo. And it was, in those days, it was full contact sport Taekwondo. It's not like it is today. And I had no desire to really compete at their level, but I really enjoyed working out with a lot of these, young people who were, national caliber athletes.
Right.
And I enjoyed the whole full contact thing. And then after, I think I started around maybe 6 or 7 o'clock, the school would transition to Hapkido, and mostly adults, or almost all adults. And we would do that till it would close.
Nice. So did you do any tournaments at all? I know you said it didn't really interest you, but did you give it a try at all, or just kind of just for yourself?
I just did it for myself.
Nice.
And fighting rounds and sparring there anyway, so that there would have been nothing I would have done in the tournament that we weren't doing there, other than, of course, meeting unfamiliar people.
Right.
In that context. But, there were so many good martial artists there back in the day. You got a mouthful.
Right. And I know we always hear that, I don't know if you call them the horror stories or not, but just how hardcore the classes were back then. Not even just the sparring, just everything in general, the workouts, just compared to nowadays. I know my instructor started training, I think, in 79 or 80, and Taekwondo also. And I've heard the stories about how they taught then, and even just compared to how they taught in the 90s to now when I got into it.
No, you're right. And it really had to change, I guess. But, I'm happy to have had that experience. I mean, I remember, I'm remembering these things as we talk about them, but every Friday used to be, it was called fight night, but every Friday was sparring, full contact sparring.
Okay.
And, that was it. And gradually what started, and everybody would get banged up. Sometimes, a lot of times we had hogus on, sometimes not. Most of the time we had hogus on and head protection. But, what would happen is, of course, things would get out of control, or two guys would, have it in for each other to begin with. And they, would break out into some kind of, fight that wasn't the fight supposed to be going on. And, they had to cool people off and that kind of thing. But over the years, what kind of happened was people stopped coming, and it gets, Friday would come around and there, where there used to be packed with people, there'd be hardly any. And Vashon was like, okay, they don't, they'll come during the week, but they won't come on Friday. Okay, well, I'm going to fix that. I'm not going to do it on Fridays anymore. I'm just going to stick it in the week sometime when they don't know it, so they can't, can't exploit it.
That's awesome.
And he did that for a little bit, and then he stopped doing it because and I said, I'm just losing students, and people don't want to do it, and he says, I guess I can understand that, because sometimes they got to go to work, if they can't hold a pencil, because their fingers dislocated or whatever, or they're in pain throughout the day, maybe that's not a good thing. So that kind of thing just started to disappear. And a lot of the kind of hard training that you talked about, sort of bizarre calisthenics that probably weren't necessarily healthy for the body.
Right.
All of that, I just saw it disappear from the school over the years. Because people didn't want to do it, so.
Yep, exactly. And I mean, I've tried to talk my instructor, like, just, once a month you should do like a throwback, like 80s or 90s class, and to see how many people would show up. He's like, you'd be the only one there.
Really? Yeah, he's probably right.
Yeah. Well, it'd be fun, one-on-one training. So then how long did you stay at that school? And then also, did you get into teaching at all while you were there?
Yeah, I taught quite a bit while I was there. Well, from the 1980s till 2006, I was with him. So, I don't know, 25 or 30 years. And there was a point during the 90s, I had my own classes that he helped to try and send people to, Hapkido. He's very supportive of that. It was his first love. His big love was Hapkido anyway. And so most of the people that have stayed with me to this day for decades, came to me in those early years or later years, I should say, at Korean Martial Arts Center.
Okay. So how do you think your teaching style has changed over the years then? Thinking back to maybe that first class you taught or first one-on-one lesson you had to kind of nowadays or whatever, how do you think it's changed?
Well, hopefully I'm more intelligent, you know, than maybe I was. I mean, I would think obviously I probably know a lot more, but in terms of the style of how I teach, I'm not sure it's all that different. You know, I taught at university for a decade in the arts.
Okay.
So I had a fair amount of experience as a teacher, and teaching martial arts is obviously different, but it's not. I think in the end of the day, you want to provide benefit to others. And I think it all begins and ends with there. And I just try to look at people individually and figure out, you know, what's the best way to help them get where they want to go.
Okay.
And, you know, beyond that, it's just basically teaching a curriculum of techniques. If there's things they have problems with, you try and figure out ways to break it down. I remember one student that I had a long time ago, back in, you know, maybe in the early 90s, who was probably the most unathletically gifted person I've ever seen in my life in terms of just being able to do things in bodily movements. And I think, you know, that was quite a challenge. But, you know, in a lot of martial arts, it's fairly complex movements. But the way I remember approaching it with him was to just keep breaking things down into the simplest, littlest pieces possible. And he got it, you know, and you know, eventually he attained a black belt after many years. He was dedicated and he stuck with it. And, you know, those kind of things where you help someone who seems unhelpable, those are actually the things I remember the most and probably have the greatest sense of, you know, satisfaction or gratification for being able to participate in. Because the gifted athlete, you know, the cream of the crop is gonna rise no matter what you do, even if you do the wrong things or teach
True.
the wrong way. You know, they're gifted, they're gonna get there. But
Right.
you know, it's what you can do for those that aren't, I think, that's you know, very satisfying. And you know, you learn a lot about teaching because you have to do different things for different people. You can't just have a blueprint. I don't think of it. At least that's how I approach it.
Right. That's great. I love that. So what led you to, or did you, I mean, what led you to Wally J? Is that someone, did you seek him out? Was he recommended? Had you heard about him before you started training with him?
I saw him out. I think people had talked about him. I didn't really know, you know, that Wally J was Wally J. I just heard this was a really great, you know, Jujutsu, Judo, Jujutsu practitioner over there in Alameda, you know, and a couple of friends I was training with, you should really check it out. And I did. And then I came to, you know, you do a little research and realized who he was and so forth. But he was a very humble man, a very caring and nice teacher, I guess is all you could say. And, you know, both of those teachers, if I hadn't met Wally J, I probably never would have written a martial arts book or pursued the career that you know, I don't know if you call it a career, but I call it a life in the martial arts. And a lot of that was just through the example of his life, you know, and talking to him a lot about things. A lot of times he would hang around after class was over and, you know, he would sit there and talk to whoever wanted to sit and talk to him for, you know, for an hour or so. And this is, you know, 9-10 o'clock at night. He was very enthusiastic, but you know, to get back to the example of his life, you know, a lot of the things that he had to deal with in terms of criticisms and this and that, and how he prevailed, a lot of his ideas really, I would say it both inspired me, but it also gave me the confidence to believe in things I already believed in and really pursue them and go after them. Both of them, both he and Master Jung were also teachers that were not dogmatic at all. They were both very innovative or looking to innovate constantly. And they were both very encouraging of a person in developing, you know, an individual approach to the martial arts in terms of style and technique once they were already black belts.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the thing about Wally J too was a lot of what he taught and how he taught was applicable to almost any martial art. And he really helped me to perceive and see that the common threads that run through, all martial arts. I mean, human bodies are all the same. Joints bend and break in the same ways. Body mechanics are fundamentally the same. There's just different choices about maybe how to go about applying techniques or, execute kicks and things like that. But there's a commonality that runs through all of them. And, he was one of the people that helped me or provoked me to sort of look deeper and understand that.
Wow. I never had the opportunity to meet him, read a lot about him over the years and stuff. And so now, obviously, most people, they hear the term jiu-jitsu and their mind automatically goes to Brazilian jiu-jitsu, mainly because of, the UFC and the popularity. So if you had to try to explain to someone the difference between Brazilian jiu-jitsu and small circle jiu-jitsu that you learned from Wally J, was there something, what are some of the standout things that, do you know much about Brazilian jiu-jitsu and what the differences are?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm not a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, so,
right.
Anything I say, they'll probably say, no, that's not quite true. And they're probably right, but I remember back when the first UFC thing was happening, I remember Wally J, we were sitting around talking, and he was saying, we were talking about this exact thing. And he said, he goes, I call Helio, I think it was Helio Gracie. Is that the great grandpa?
Yes, correct.
Yep. Yeah, Helio called me the other day, and we were talking, and he was saying, Wally, what's the difference between your jiu-jitsu and my jiu-jitsu? And I said, I don't think there's any difference, because you do the same things I do.
Wow.
And that's what I would say, basically. Okay. I don't know that there is a difference. I mean, the Brazilians really spend a lot of time refining their art in the context of fighting, full contact fighting.
Right.
And when I look at it, I see they do little things differently, but those little things have a huge, huge difference. A lot of that, at least what I saw the day when I used to look at a lot of this stuff, was directly a result of, the context of trying to do something. You're on the bottom and you're trying to shift to a reclining arm bar, and the guy's trying to pummel you from the top. Well, kind of the basic traditional entry, not so good, because you're uncovered, you're uncovering your face. Whereas they would tend to kind of maneuver, obtain a grip, really try and work that grip in hard while they're protecting, and then make a move, things like that. And so I think there's small differences. I don't know if it's true anymore, but in the day they didn't do a lot of throwing. And I know some of them used to show up when I was talking to Willie Cahill, was another, judo practitioner in the Bay Area, Olympic coach. And I remember him telling me that, they would sometimes show up to watch the throwing, some of the Brazilians in the Bay Area, but they never wanted to get out on the mat. He would always invite them out on the mat, but they didn't want to do that. Probably because, most of the people there were Olympic judoists, and they're pretty, no matter how good you are, they're pretty good at throwing you.
Right.
So, and the Brazilians at that time had a fairly limited throwing repertoire. They would try and maneuver in for a hip throw and certain other kinds of things, but try and get to the ground. Now, I don't know if that's true anymore. They could have, really expanded into the throwing arts, but small circle jiu-jitsu had, a lot of throwing arts.
Okay.
That I didn't see early on in the Brazilian thing, which is not a criticism to say one's better than the other. It's just a difference.
Yep. Okay. Now, and you had mentioned, you said you probably wouldn't have written your first book if you hadn't met Wally J. So what led to that? What led to you becoming an author?
Well, ever since I started training with Master Jung, every night it was something different that he would do. He didn't follow a curriculum per se, or maybe he sort of did in his head, but he also just would teach whatever he wanted to teach, like a lot of people in that day. And, there was no book on Hapkido. There was nothing, comprehensive you could look at to try and remember any of this stuff. So I had a notebook, and every night after class, I'd write down whatever it was we did. I think I was riding mass transit at the time. It was like a 40-minute trip. And I would just try and write down everything that happened and try to remember it and classify it. So after quite a few years, this, it was like a 2-inch, thick notebook of just handwritten notes and things like that. So that was sort of the start of it. And I don't know, I think at some point, I guess in the 90s, I know I had a general dissatisfaction with the state of martial arts literature as it existed at the time. I was really dissatisfied that there was nothing out there on Hapkido. It was completely pretty much an oral tradition at that point. And there were a few things out there, but they were mostly very brief, and it's an art that consists of around 2,000 core techniques and, piles of variations on top of that. So I suppose that's, I thought I could do something that would provide an immense benefit to others that would also allow me to coalesce and make use of all these life skills that I had outside of the martial arts in a way that would be uniquely me. It was something I could do that other martial artists couldn't, not because they didn't have training or skills or knowledge and all. They had all of it. There's plenty of, profound people out there. But I had these skills as a designer, as a professional designer, how to take complex amounts of information and organize it and, put it in a published form. I designed books. I was, worked as a designer for numerous Fortune 500 companies, designing complex corporate identity and branding programs and all this. And here was martial arts, something that I actually loved, that I could put my professional skills to use that in a unique way. I mean, really not that different than what you're doing with your podcast, Jim. Mm-hmm. You're a professional sound engineer, and that's finding an outlet in your doing these interviews and podcasts, right?
True. Yeah, definitely. Years ago, I wanted to write a book. I actually took creative writing classes and stuff. And I know for a high school assignment one time, I actually wrote a 120 some page story, and I was like, I'm going to write a book. And of course, I never actually had the patience to sit down and do a real book. So I don't know.
I've already done a lot of writing professionally before that. So not as a writer, right, in terms of fiction or whatever, but in terms of my job as a designer. So, but there was a big learning process in writing the book. And for some crazy reason, I picked the largest book to do first. I never meant it to be that large. Mm-hmm. I thought I'd get through with the whole thing in a year and move back to my life. But as I kept going in, it seemed to keep growing and expanding. And,
right.
And it eventually pretty much took over my life. I mean, there was a point where for several years I was sleeping about 4 hours a night, just trying to plow through and get it done.
Wow.
And your health suffers for that. Your friendships suffer for that. Your career certainly suffers for that. But
yeah, I was reading before we started talking. I was reading about the big Taekwondo one for sure, just because that's my course style is traditional Taekwondo, and just reading about that, and it looks like an amazing book. I might actually be ordering that one. That
that one happened much more quickly. That was probably a year or two to do.
Just full of information. I mean, I love what it has in it, and I love it. It's rare to find one that actually has the Palge forms, because that's the ones we do. We've always done those.
You're studying Taekwondo?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, yep. And that also has a huge section on Olympic style Taekwondo, and that's full contact Olympic style. Back when it was something you'd want to do and something you'd want to watch.
Oh, definitely.
It's really kind of changed
when they actually knew how to punch back then.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you didn't get a lot of points for it, but it was a full contact sport. As you probably know, that's really changed in recent years. It's
definitely
become kind of a strange, aberration of point fighting, I guess is what you'd say. It's a lot of little taps and things like that, and
they're trying to bring some of that back. One of my previous guests is a top referee and stuff, and expert on Olympic Taekwondo, and he said they're actually trying to bring some of that back, and they're trying to bring punching back into it, and he said that it'll look a lot different at the next Olympics, so it'll be interesting to see if that actually happens.
Who's that?
Editor-in-chief of Taekwondo Life magazine. Marc Tedeschi is his name.
Mm-hmm. In my opinion, they never should have taken that stuff out. I mean,
agreed.
I get why they did it. I mean, a lot of it had to do with, the judging was really biased.
Yes.
And not always highly competent. So, they tried to bring in electronic scoring as a way to level the field. But, the end result was that basically what happened was all you had to do was touch a target. So it turned into just little tappy and flicky sorts of action and movements. There was a requirement back in the day. It had to be a quote unquote trembling blow
Right.
that went out the window. There was no point advantage to head kicks or anything like that. I think that was taken away. So, competitors are ultimately going to do whatever it takes to win.
Right.
So, and that's always has to, happen within the framework of the rules. So if, whatever the fact that it's evolved into this is clearly a result of the rules and how it's scored and points and everything else. And I think it's a real shame because I had heard at some point it was in jeopardy of being pulled from the Olympics. I don't know if that would ever happen, but if you were to look at the last Olympics or maybe the last few, I don't watch these things too much anymore, and compare that with, the fighting in the 1990s up to around 2000.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you'd see something markedly different. Like,
definitely.
In one of the, I can't remember his name, in the Bay Area, there was several Olympians, but Herb.
Herb Perez.
Herb Perez.
One of my first guests on the show, actually.
Yeah, he's been pretty. I think he's still pretty active in Taekwondo at the governing level, and I hear he's been pretty outspoken about it, and rightfully so. And perhaps people like that will bring about change, or move it backwards. Not backwards, but back into a sport that's at least more, more martial, and I think has much greater, visual appeal to spectators too.
Right. Yeah.
That's my 2 cents about it.
And out of the tournaments we do, it is, the WTF Taekwondo style sparring, but it's more of the traditional style of it. It's like you come to one of our tournaments and it's not what you see in the Olympics. It's, it still has pretty hardcore. We have, solid hits. We have, people score with punches. They actually don't have their hands just hanging down at their sides.
Maybe there's still a lot of that happening.
Hopefully,
I don't know.
hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
Nice. And I'll definitely put links out there for all your books and everything, and so people can see that in the show notes and stuff. So there's some great books.
Well,
out
it's
there.
sort of interesting because a few years ago, there's this opinion that sort of out there, or was anyway, that ITF is disappearing or this or that. But maybe it's 5-8 years ago, I put out a separate book on the ITF forms as they existed at the time that General Choi died, which was their final incarnation, I guess. And that book sold surprisingly well. I mean, it outstripped a lot of my other books, which was really surprising because one thought, no one's doing that anymore. They want to do WTF forms or whatever, but clearly not the case. So I think, the ITF stuff must be alive and well out there. And, perhaps more than people think.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's more than people think. So, I mean, they see the Olympics and think that's, the epitome of everything, and that's what's going, but it's not true. A lot of the smaller schools aren't doing that, and the ones that are actually keeping it alive. So,
well, I think that's true. I think there's a lot of schools and people out there that just are quietly going about doing their thing and doing what they've always done, and some of them doing it really well. And the things you might see on YouTube or that are more visible, in social media, are sometimes those are just the people who are either self-promoters or better at self-promotion. And I think a lot of martial artists probably aren't. And so, in a way, it's hard to know exactly what's going on, right?
Exactly. So what advice would you give someone who has never done martial arts before and they're thinking of getting involved? They're just kind of wondering what are some things they should look for and maybe some things they should avoid in looking for a school or an instructor?
Well, I think it's really hard, but I think you have to trust your own feelings and opinions. And, I get letters sometimes from people like that asking that question about, oftentimes in respect to Hapkido, they don't have a school where they are and things like that, or how to decide. I think you have to go, you try and do your research, online or whatever, see what other people are thinking. But I think ultimately you got to go visit a school, sit there and watch a class or two. And do you like what you see going on? Do the people practicing there look happy? Does the art appeal to you when you see it being practiced? Does the teacher seem like someone that you could learn something from and you'd want to be around? The hard part is, of course, you're trying to make a judgment about something you don't really know anything about.
Right.
But my advice is always to trust your gut feeling about it and, try a class, if that's done, but don't get involved in a long contract. If someone wants to sign you up for years or whatever, just have an exit strategy. So if you take 4 or 5 classes and you find you don't like it for whatever reason, maybe you don't like the teacher, maybe you don't like people you're with, maybe you don't like the art, or it's just not what you thought it should be. So, leave and then try something else. That would be basically my advice.
That's great advice.
But don't leave too fast either.
Right.
Right. Give it long enough to be sure. And I think the other thing that's important is that the school's teaching martial arts values as well as combative skills, that all that's fused together. And any, true martial arts schools that is going to, of course, do that. I think that's important.
Okay, great answer. So I know we touched a little bit on the UFC, talking about like Wally J and stuff, but so what are your thoughts, as a traditional martial artist, what are your thoughts on MMA and the UFC, and are you a fan?
I think it's great. I don't watch it anymore.
Okay.
Because I'm just not that, I don't watch many professional sports at all anymore. I'm just not that interested. I have, time constraints, and I just like to get out and do things rather than watch them. Back in the beginning, I remember we were all very interested, in the, I don't know, the first 5 or 7 of them or whatever, all interested. Everybody was interested to see what would happen, and all these styles came together, would one be better than the other, or what would happen, and that kind of thing. And I think in the early years, it was, it started off as kind of a circus. There were, there were people that were tapping out in a New York minute, and people were making, I think early on, we were making all sorts of presumptions about, oh, well, that's the best style, and this kind of, doing this kind of, doing that kind of technique is useless, and this is the way to go. And that would hold, that would last until the next guy would come along in a different art, and he would beat everybody. Then everybody would go running. Oh, that's what we got to do. That's the art. I think what eventually happened over the year, like in the beginning, it was ground fighting, but then some people would, and kicking was considered a useless endeavor. But, then later on, I forget the guy's name, Andy Worthy. Does that sound right? I don't know, but there was a guy who had a spin kick, and he started knocking people out. And because, he was pretty good at it. Mm-hmm. I mean, by the standards of Hapkido and Taekwondo, we would have thought, it's a pretty slow spin kick. When you look at it, it's like, you wouldn't hit anybody because they'd see it coming. But, the people in that arena, in that context, didn't have experience with it. So it worked, and he was, he did it well enough. So I think at the end of the day, everybody began to realize it's not really the style, it's the fighter. It's the best fighter that wins. Yep. And, now they try and, I guess, at a point they all started to try and embrace all the skills. But I haven't seen it in decades, so, I don't really have any kind of a useful or intelligent opinion about it.
So who are some names that you would put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Just some that you really admire, whether it's people you actually know and met and trained with, like someone like a Wally J, or just someone like a Bruce Lee or something.
I trained with, but that was just my personal experience with people that I happened to personally choose. I mean, I was very fortunate in that, California was rich in talent, and the choices I made were very beneficial for me. And that's just, some of that's luck. But I don't have heroes per se, but I will say that I greatly admire anyone who's dedicated their lives to the martial arts and has endured in that, has stuck it out, because, there's a million reasons to quit and very few to stay. So the people that have had spent a long time in the martial arts, continually trained, I really have a great deal of respect for anyone who, conforms to that definition.
Okay.
I mean, beyond that, if I was pick some people, I think that, some of the people that have made great contributions are those that, like Jigoro Kano, who, made the transition from the highly combative art of Jujutsu into something that could be practiced safely and, in an educational system by millions of people. I mean, talking about Judo. I think, Morihei Ueshiba created a very unique martial art in Aikido that's benefited enormous amounts of people who, want to do that type of thing. So people like that. I mean, I'm sure I'm leaving out, many people who should belong on Mount Rushmore.
Hey, that's some
That,
great answers.
that's what I can think of. That's what I can think of at the moment.
Okay, cool. So throughout your 40 plus years in traditional martial arts, is there one philosophy you've learned that just rises to the top, one that's really important to you keep coming back to?
Well, I think, it kind of evolves over the years. At this point, I mean, the thing I teach and talk about is that Hapkido, or any martial art, has basically six ultimate objectives. If it's truly a martial art, not just a sport, call it fundamental underpinnings. And I would say the first would be the harmonization of body, mind, and spirit. Second objective would be the perfection of human character. The third would be development of social responsibility. Fourth would be the integration of instantaneous correct action in all aspects of life. The fifth would be the cultivation of indomitable spirit. And the sixth would be the recognition of one's inherent place in the immortal universe.
Wow.
Obviously, martial arts is training and the way in which we do that as martial arts is, of course, we train in physical techniques, combative arts.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those are really the ultimate underlying objectives of fighting and sparring in the context of martial arts.
I love
For
it.
me, anyway, that's how I
No, that's great.
articulate it.
Great answer. All right, so we got a few fun ones to wrap it up. Now, this one you can't pick one of your own, obviously, but favorite martial arts book?
As a person, I don't really have favorites of things, but when I think of some of the martial arts books that were important to me, there were a lot of them that were overseas. Like I remember years ago, there were some very good judo books coming out of Japan that were beautifully printed and produced, very comprehensive. I don't remember the names of them. I remember Master Jung having some of these things, which is where I encountered them. There were some early pamphlets that came out of Korea and Hapkido that were important because they gave us a little glimpse of something. But as important as martial arts books, I don't know. I think some of the Aikido books that have been done over the years are done to a higher level of production, and editorial standards have been, pretty good. I think actually there's a lot of judo books that are fairly detailed. General Choi wrote a book on Taekwondo.
Yep.
It's like 700 or 800 pages, I think.
Yes, correct.
So, I think that was important to Taekwondo, at least the ITF style, because it was there and in print. I can't think of too much else in the Taekwondo department. Richard Kim had a book in the 70s that, gave everybody a look at Taekwondo, what was going on. But other than that, the problem with publishing is the publishers, not necessarily the martial artists, because there's a belief that, you can't sell a book that's costs more than $10 or $15.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these publishers that were doing martial arts books in the United States would produce very small, kind of rattly printed books,
mm-hmm.
That didn't really serve to do justice to to those martial arts. And I think that was a false assumption, which is borne out by some of the stuff Weatherhill published. And in my books, because, they're not cheaply produced, they're rather expensive, but, and it's in Weatherhill's heyday, or in the first few years those books were published, this is a publisher that publishes all sorts of stuff on Asia, East Asian culture and martial arts. We're 22% of their earnings. So that kind of flipped that whole notion. And I would hope that publishers would get more brave about publishing quality martial arts books. Unfortunately, it's not a good time these days for books because things are moving towards digital content. And I think the amount of people reading books is probably less than it was 20 years ago. Not sure about that, but
which is sad.
That's kind of my thought. So, so there's been a great contraction in the publishing industry, but that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, I guess.
That's a good answer, though. All right. So now you said you don't really have favorites, so that might put a damper on our final two questions, but do you have a favorite martial arts TV show?
I don't watch much TV anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The Kung Fu TV show was influential to me. Now, probably if you went back and looked at it today, it's probably not really all that great as the art of filmmaking goes.
No.
But I think anything out there that creates a positive impression of the martial arts in its totality, that is, as a way of life, as a philosophical underpinnings to a combative art, I think is, if it does that, I think it's beneficial. I went to school for art and design, photography, studied film, so I've always had a love of filmmaking and movies, and probably watch more of that kind of stuff than television.
Okay. So have you watched the newer show, The Warrior, at all? Have you seen that one?
No, I haven't. Is that a movie or on television?
You might enjoy. Yeah, it's a television show. You might enjoy it because it's actually what Kung Fu was supposed to be. Because it was Bruce Lee's ideas and stuff, and it's actually Shannon Lee helped create this TV show from Bruce Lee's notes on what Kung Fu was supposed to be. So it's you might enjoy it. It's actually really good. But now, final question. This one maybe have a better answer for. Favorite martial arts movie?
Well, I don't know if I have a better answer. I can't remember anything. I can't remember what I ate for lunch yesterday. So, it's sort of the same thing. But, over the years, I've always admired Kurosawa's films, because they're great films. Some of them deal with various aspects of martial arts, martiality. I forget the name of it, Crouching Tiger or something or other.
Hidden Dragon. Yep.
Yeah, that was. I thought that was a wonderful film, and if it has martial arts in it, all the more enjoyable. The Billy Jack films were important to Hapkido because it gave Hapkido a public face. I don't know that it's great filmmaking per se. I enjoyed the Kill Bill movies, and again, I don't know if that was an exceptional display of martial arts per se, but they're great. They're great films. And, the funny thing is, when you look at some of the older films that have martial arts in them, the things that are done today, and over the years, you really see, you see a real evolution in the level of choreography. It's much more sort of interesting and, sort of realistic than what was done before. And, filmmaking is a funny thing because you could do real martial arts and kind of film it, but it probably wouldn't look as good or create the same impression as, choreographed things that ultimately create. A great martial arts film is one that creates, or a great film period, it creates, one of the things that Crouching Tiger did was it raised the idea of the martial arts to the level of legend, or mythology, or, something like that. And I think that some really interesting martial arts sequences in films these days are actually being done by actors who aren't really even martial artists. And, that's because whoever's doing the choreography is doing a really good job. I think modern filmmaking techniques allow you to now, take someone, like that student I talked about earlier who had no physical skills, and you just break it down into pieces. And if an actor has some athletic ability, you teach them the moves in pieces. It may be a complex scene of fighting, but it's all shot and done in pieces and then put together. And if you do that, it can look pretty good. And I think that's what they're doing today.
Okay. Nice. Great answer. So, well, anything else you want to mention that maybe I forgot to ask about, I forgot to cover before we wrap it up? Like I said, I'll put links out there for your books and everything, and I'll put links out there for your Hapkido website. Anything else we want to mention quickly?
No, I don't think so. Okay. But
I just want to thank you, Marc. This has been a lot of fun. Like I said, I knew very little about you before the interview and stuff, and amazing martial arts career. I didn't realize you had trained with Wally J, which is cool. Someone I've always looked up to in the martial arts, and I know I had actually put a request out to his son for an interview. So I'm hoping to hear back from him. He'd be a fun one to have on the podcast too. But I really enjoyed your storytelling and chatting with you, and I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and thanks for having me on. It's nothing I'd rather do than talk about the martial arts all day.
I know I could do this all day too. It's so much fun.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.